Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Lead Volunteers Live and the Lead Ministry, Lead Volunteers podcast. Super excited that you're here. We got a special guest today. If you don't know Brittany Nelson, she's one that you should get to know. So she's a friend of mine. She's a friend of Sarah, my wife. We are big fans of Brittany. We're grateful that she's going to be here today. But our topic, interestingly enough, today is please no more boring meetings. And so we're going to have Brittany on in just a minute, and want to just mention to you that the Lead Volunteers material at leadministry.com, Lead Volunteers is a done-for-you master level course. And one of the things that we have, one of the modules is called the Train, as in training module. And one of the things that we have is a very, very, very robust platform and plan for you to be successful when it comes to meetings. And so we have a great meeting agenda template and a lot of stuff. But today we're talking about making sure that it's fun, which, by the way, Brittany, that was never something that I struggled with. I kind of just like to have,
can't imagine.
Yeah, I kind of just like to have fun. But you're kind of a fun person as well. And so, well, first of all, just give us a little introduction to yourself, would you?
Sure. So my name is Brittany Nelson. I'm the creator of Deeper Kidmin, which is an online hub of creative resources made for children's ministry leaders by children's ministry leaders. I have a 20-month-old girl who keeps us on our toes. We live in Georgia, and I'm excited to be on the podcast today. I do have a little bit of a cold, so if you hear me sniffling or if I'm getting water at any point, I'll try to mute myself before I have to have a coughing fit. But I do have a little bit of a cold today.
It is all good. Well, we're grateful that you're here, and you are fun. Your daughter is adorable, and every time I see her, I'm like, oh my word, I think she just needs hugged. You know? So she's super fun. Well, we are very, very grateful that you're here. Well, today we're talking about from a meeting to a party. And so one of the things that we do on the podcast is we try to kind of break it down for the listeners. And so we got three big categories. Let's define it, let's develop it, and then of course you, Brittany, are going to help us kind of land the plane and help us to do it. So first of all, from a define it standpoint, please no more boring meetings. Am I right?
Amen.
We've sat through enough. Let's not be the instigator or the host of a boring meeting. We don't want that.
You don't want to do that.
Well, I would say that, quite honestly, meetings can be the bane of all of our existence, can't they?
Yes, there's so many times that we get done with a meeting and I thought, that could have been an email.
You're exactly right. That's exactly right. And so what would define a boring meeting?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think a boring meeting is something that, I just said it could be sent in an email. If it's something that's short enough that doesn't need to be explained in person, then make it an email, make it a memo, whatever you want to call it.
Right.
But it doesn't have to be a meeting. I think also a meeting or something that makes a boring meeting is when someone just sits and has to listen to information over and over and over and over again for any length of time longer than maybe 10 minutes.
Right. And so it shouldn't be...
Like if you're just sitting and listening, it's a little bit going to be boring.
It shouldn't be a sit and get. Am I right?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Everybody needs to remember that our volunteers who are hoping come to these meetings to gain good information or something like this, they have a yard to mow. They have kids to put down. They got stuff to do. They
have
lives, jobs, and out of the overflow of their lives, they're coming to a meeting with us. Interestingly enough, this was a revelation for me a number of years ago. I wake up at 3 a.m. thinking about the ministry that I lead. My volunteers do not wake up at 3 a.m. thinking about the ministry that I lead. They're thinking about their job. They're thinking about their lives. And so we got to put it in context that our world is not their universe, right?
Yes.
And so a bad meeting is just like heaping on, nobody wants that. Am I right?
Right. And I think even just calling it a meeting Like no one wants to attend a meeting or put a meeting on their calendar. So
Right.
even if we can just change the name of it and call it a volunteer training or a summit or a gathering or a VIP session, like
Sure.
whatever you want to call it, but even changing the name away from a volunteer meeting, I
Yes.
think can even just subliminally help us shift the mindset a little bit about what our meetings actually look like.
Absolutely. And I think it comes down to like whatever it is, make it more fun. That's what we're seeking to do,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes,
Okay, so
for
when it
sure.
comes to number two, so we defined it. Let's have no more bad meetings. That's a pretty easy one, I think, for everybody out there. Nobody
Right.
wants
I
that.
think everyone would agree, right? They don't want to host a bad meeting.
That's exactly right. Now, the interesting thing is we've often sat through enough bad meetings
Mm,
that we could quickly define and poke holes and maybe even, watch out, judge others for their bad meetings. But
mm-hmm.
really, I think the idea is what in the world could we do? Maybe could I learn from a bad meeting? Possibly.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But what would you say would be the components or the what's happening, I guess, at a good meeting?
Yeah. Well, first, I would say think about a good party that you've ever attended, really, because that's kind of what we want to shift the mindset to is changing a meeting into a party. Because
Yeah.
parties are something that people want to come to. People usually enjoy them most of the time,
Yeah.
right? If you're there. So think about like the best party that you've ever attended. And for me, I think of our wedding. So my husband and I celebrated our 8th wedding anniversary this
Aw.
past October. And since we've gotten married, every wedding we've been to, we've of course enjoyed them all and have loved the couples that we've seen get married. But every single time we're like, our wedding was better,
Right.
like every single time, right? And so I think through like the components of a wedding or the components of a good party and
Sure.
what makes a good party. And so I think there's kind of three things. And the first one is good communication. I think the second one is food and fun, which could, I guess, you could count that as two, but food is fun. Like I think of
Yeah,
food and I'm
right.
like, oh, fun. So I just put those together. And then the third thing I think that's really important about hosting a good meeting or a good party is connection. And so those three things, good communication, food and fun, and creating a place for people to connect with you, with your ministry, and with each other are three really important elements of hosting a non-boring
Yeah.
meeting.
A fun meeting. So let's shift real quick. Tell us what help me out here real quick. What when you say good communication is going to make for a
Mhm.
good meeting, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, I think the first thing, well, I kind of mentioned already, don't call it a meeting, right?
Right.
Like call it something else, call it something more exciting. But I think a big part of this is communicating well enough in advance.
Okay.
So I tried to give my volunteers at least 3 months of in advance notice
There you
before
go.
our volunteer meetings actually happen. So like you think about again a wedding, right? You send out save the dates
Yes, you do.
several months in advance. So just like with a training session with your volunteers, send out a save the date to all of your volunteers even if you don't have any of the other details. Maybe you have the date, the time and the place, but
Yes.
that's it and that's okay. But it gets it on their calendars early so that as they are filling up their calendars and other things in their lives are happening, they know that it's already there. They can put it on their calendars so it's already a time blocked out for them to give to you and to your ministry.
Okay, so
So
interestingly enough,
communicating,
communicating like ahead of time that
yep.
you've got this coming up. And the funny thing is,
Mm-hmm.
I was working with somebody through the lead ministry coaching and they were like, "Oh my word. I've got to have all of this planned out." And I was like, "No, you don't. Just pick a
Yeah.
date, let them
Yep.
know, and you'll have plenty of time to fill in the details." Which some people get freaked out by that. They're like, "I
Yep.
can't announce that I have something that's going to be coming up if I don't have it completely dialed in right now."
Right.
And
Right.
you can do that.
Yes, you
Uh,
can. As someone who also struggles with that, I'm also a person who wants to have everything planned out before I tell the world about it. But I just learned the value very quickly of sharing as early as
yeah, I
possible
think
about
that's
those
wise.
dates so that our volunteers could be on board. And then as you get closer to time, you can share more of the details.
Yes,
I think another element with that too is trying to eliminate any possible excuses or make it as easy as possible for your volunteers to attend your
that's
training
right.
sessions. So if they have kids, like for us, we actually hosted two identical volunteer training sessions every year. They were about a week apart, They were the exact same thing, but it gave volunteers two different options so that if
Yes.
one date didn't work, the other date could. And then we used our youth volunteers who are amazing. My husband is a youth pastor, so I really get to tap into our youth pretty well because I love serving with them. But we would use our youth as babysitters for
Yes.
one volunteer training session and then as attendees for the next one. So I would ask our youth to attend a session and serve a session. And so that way, parents who are volunteering and were like, well, what do I do with my kids? I can say, don't worry, we've got it covered. And
Which
we've got
is a
someone.
legitimate thing. That's a legitimate
Oh, for
thing,
sure.
is their
Oh,
kids.
yeah.
I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
do you
Oh,
want to
yeah.
hold your daughter's as cute as could be, but I don't think she's going to make a meeting fun.
No, I would
She's
not be able to pay attention to anything else going on.
That's exactly right.
'Cause
Now, when you were talking about a fun meeting or a good meeting
Mhm.
has good communication and sending that thing 3 months out, totally
Mhm.
agree with that. However, for me, one thing that I felt very compelled to do was to send a meeting agenda, maybe a couple days, maybe
Mhm.
a week out, that clearly defines what we're going to be doing. I think there's a leader that I know, and he said, if there is not an agenda, I'm not attending. And
Mm,
that's throwing it down pretty hard. However, the concept I
sure.
think is still exists. A
Yeah.
meeting without an agenda or a gathering without an agenda, it can be just this serpentine whipsy whip. Who knows where it's going to go, and that's not good.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have some defined areas, right, and you can send that out, that's going to encourage people. Okay, so we got good
Yeah.
communication
Hmm.
for a good meeting. Now, what about the second one? What was your second one? Food and fun, I think, wasn't it?
Food and fun. Yes, I've
Yes.
always said if you feed them, they will come. I
If you
think this
feed them.
applies to volunteer training. I think it applies to youth ministry, children's ministry, like any type of party. If you feed them, they will come.
I think I agree.
So even if it's something as simple as like a brownie bite or some
Sure.
trail mix, right? Like having some sort of food or treat at your volunteer training sessions is just really valuable. I think it's an easy way to communicate to your volunteers that you have thought about them,
That's
that you
right.
recognize they're going to spend 45 minutes to an hour or however long your session is going to be. They're going to spend that time with you and that they might get a little hungry or they might want a little something to nibble on. So I think food is a super easy way
Yes.
to get people excited and get people help people pay attention
And
when you have to talk about planning center for 20 minutes, you
yeah, for
know?
sure.
So,
But I would say, interestingly enough, as people are kind of gathering in, right? So the
mm,
meeting starts at maybe, let's say, 6:30 or something, and people are showing up at 6:15. Having something for them to grab,
hmm,
nibble on, and have this pre-conversation with other volunteers standing around. That is part of this community
mm,
development. And so it doesn't really cost
for
that much
sure.
to get some brownie bites. You do not have to bake them from scratch, though you
No.
can. Uh, but having just a little bit of a treat, right? Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
now, depending on the meeting type, I usually had four different meeting types. I had a big annual meeting. I had quarterly
Mm-hmm.
gatherings with people who were really, really, really key. I had monthly strategic offsite meetings with some really key people, and then, of course,
Mm,
weekly meetings
mm-hmm.
with very deep insiders. But even at those quarterly or monthly gatherings, we brought in good food. If it was over lunch, we brought in great food, and it's just important. I think though
Mm-hmm.
that it's that opening time when somebody is first originally
Mm,
getting there, that a brownie bite, and it's just we're all weird and we're socially awkward, every one of us, right? And so
yes.
people are scared junior hires at all ages. And so what
Mm,
they're wanting to do is have some type of a security blanket. We're all Linus
mm,
with our little security blanket, and a brownie bite can be an easy security blanket. Would you agree?
mm. Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think too, kind of expanding beyond food, because food is a lot of fun, but I think there
Sure.
are other ways that you can have fun in a meeting too. And if you work in children's ministry, especially, then this is right in our wheelhouse. Like
Right.
this is something we do all the time. But giving your volunteer training sessions a theme. So for our annual trainings, like you talked about, you did once a year. We always had a theme for ours. So the entire training session was structured around a specific theme or idea. And so different things like one year we did superheroes, one year we did put me in coach. And so it was all baseball themed. So everything we did was around baseball and used
Okay.
baseball terminology and like the food labels even that we use
Okay.
all had to do with baseball.
So did
So
did
using
you
a theme can make it super fun.
did you wear like a striped referee thing with a whistle?
No, but our volunteer shirts for that year were baseball tees that
Okay.
had our ministry name on them that we were able to give out to our volunteers or that they could purchase and that we wore as staff as we were leading the session.
And actually that makes a meeting seem like a party. All of a sudden you
Yeah.
have, and it doesn't
Yeah.
take very much, right? You have little, and
No.
somebody
Mm-mm.
in your ministry is this person. Am I right?
Right.
Who's like, they're like, oh my word, did you say decorate? Can I do that?
Right.
Can I go to the dollar store and find, the luau theme or whatever it is, right?
Uh-huh. Yep. Whatever the theme is. I've even seen a popular one I've seen recently is like a nacho themed training party, and I was
Ah,
like, wow, I would go to that. I'm pretty sure queso is
right.
one of my love languages. So I
Yeah,
was like,
right.
nachos,
Exactly.
like, yes, that's like nacho average training. I was like, that sounds so cool. I want to go.
There it is right there. We could click stop right now. And I think nacho average training. I think that's
Yes.
fantastic. And then all we need is the senior pastor to come in the Nacho Libre, like a pro
Yes.
wrestler suit.
Right, right.
That's gonna
Oh
make a
my gosh,
splash. That'd be
that would be
terrible.
amazing.
That would be amazing. Yeah. So we're making parties fun. We're talking about making sure that you have good communication, making sure second
Mm-hmm.
that you got some food and some fun. Now here's something that I did a
Mm-hmm.
number of years ago. Now this was at a quarterly gathering. It was a little bit longer time frame. People had kicked out a half a day to be with me, right?
Oh wow.
So that's commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually had contests. We had a bridge building contest, and the bridge building, everybody got a roll of tape, everybody got a Sunday stack newspaper, and they got four balloons, and they had to build from scratch a bridge that would hold a theology book and allow a theology book to go under it. And so for some people, they're starting to break out in sweat and get hives right now because they're like, what are you
Right.
talking about? Who would want to do that? But it turned into these little
Mm.
micro bonding experiences as they had to
Mm-hmm.
overcome some kind of a fun challenge. And there were some leadership lessons to go with that. But the idea is that if I have an elongated period of time, I'm
Mm.
going to do something fun. Now, this weekend we had my family was here in town, and we played a game called Who Knew? And I believe that it's out of print. It's by Cranium, but Who Knew? You could find it on eBay, is where we found ours. And Who Knew is a very fun game. It's kind of like apples to apples where you're predicting
Mm.
what somebody else likes. And so at one of these offsite meetings, we would play a get to know you board game. And that was
Oh, fun.
baked into the agenda. And it
Mm-hmm.
was fun. And it was an opportunity for us to get to know one another. And somebody might go, oh my word, so like we're paying you and you're taking me away from my family to go play a board game. But it was strategic. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah. Yeah, it's super valuable. So I mentioned our superhero theme that we did
Yeah.
one year. One of the things that we did to make that fun was we just had a little printable where people could figure out their superhero name. And basically
Okay.
they just took the first letter of their first name and like they took their initials and then came up with some goofy superhero name. I think I was like Captain Plato or something like that. Like
Right.
something whatever. But it was a fun way to get volunteers talking with each other, laughing with each other, breaks up a little bit of the monotony of hearing you talk for an
It,
hour or
it,
however long your sessions are.
and I think it also kind of breaks up the I'm awkward junior hire, no matter how old you are,
Mm,
experience, right? Because all of a sudden, then
hmm.
you as the leader can say, okay, share with a neighbor what your superhero name was, and then
Yep.
who has a really funny one? And that's an easy
Hmm.
way, right? That's an easy way for people to break the ice and to have fun. Okay, so
Yes.
the things that we've talked about so far, make sure you're communicating well in advance
Hmm.
about your meeting. Get a meeting agenda, communicate that as well. Have fun, have some food, do a game, do something playful, have a theme. All agreed, love every one of
Yep.
these. And what is the third thing that makes a good party?
So the third thing is connections. Like when I think again back to my wedding, that was the one time in my life, except maybe my funeral, but I won't be there. The one time in my life when everyone from everyone that I loved from all the different worlds in my life were all together.
Yeah.
So my high school friends, my college friends, our church family, my family, extended family, my husband's family, right? Like everyone was in one place for
Sure.
this celebration of our wedding. And I think it's such a unique time, but I think that's what we have to foster with our volunteer trainings too, is pulling everyone together. So the greeters and the nursery workers and the preteen
Yes.
leaders and the people who just pull together the supplies for you every week, like pulling everyone together for a unique celebration, for a unique time of training. So that relationship building and that connection, I think, is so, so valuable when it comes to our volunteer trainings, like not only connecting them with each other. And so, that's where the fun comes in and the icebreaker type stuff, but also connecting them back to the vision of your ministry and
Sure.
really relaying the important information of why they're there every Sunday, why they show up 20 minutes before service to make sure that they have, the lessons read and the toys wiped down and all that kind of stuff. But really
The
communicating
why.
the why and
Yeah.
connecting them with each other and with your ministry, I think is a key part of volunteer trainings.
Well, and I think that one way that we sought to succeed at this is we went to the extra effort of bringing in round tables. And we
Mm,
did not have just rows and rows and rows of chairs, or we didn't have,
hmm.
if we had the easy risers set up, which we had
Yeah.
easy risers, right? We would actually configure them that it would be in these little micro pods of people. And I think that that's
Mm,
important. So geography determines history, right? A
mm,
civilization was built here or there because there was water, right? Or there was a
hmm.
valley here. So geography determines history. Well, the setup of our room is going to determine whether it's community or it's anti-community. Am I right?
Yeah. Hmm. Hmm.
And so I think that the food fosters community. Um,
Hmm.
I think another thing, Brittany, that I often tried to do was not have it be a monologue, as in the
Mm,
communication
hmm.
didn't just come from my mouth, wasn't just a one, if like you did like a little chart, right? And it wasn't an arrow just coming from the speaker person and disseminating
Right.
out. What I tried to do was to have communication from me back to me, have
Mm,
communication from them. And so I baked in opportunities for, hey, now gather with your group of three again and talk.
hmm.
What would you say are the characteristics of a compassionate leader in children's
Mm,
ministry? And so then they talk about that, and then I say, hey, one person or two people, and so we're getting this kind of interaction. And so that
yes.
breeds community, because a talking
Hmm.
head is not a fun meeting. It's not a fun
No.
party, right?
Right, right. Yeah, one of the things that we did with our volunteers that I loved and that they loved,
Yeah.
they were a little bit intimidated at first, I will admit that, but it ended up being their favorite part of the training session. Was I gave out a list of all of our kids' names
Hmm.
that were in our ministry, and I just had them get into groups of 3 or 4, and they just spend a few minutes praying over the kids together. And so they prayed out loud. They prayed for kids by name. They prayed. It was in a smaller group, so for the ones who were
Sure.
uncomfortable praying out loud, right? Like they didn't have to do it in a huge setting. But our volunteers really found that time valuable because they stayed even connected. I had one group who decided to continue meeting together, like
That's
to pray for
amazing.
our kids. I was like, this, I didn't even tell you to do that. Like, that's awesome.
Well, I
So
mean,
it's a great opportunity.
in isn't that a piece to the discipleship puzzle? I mean, we
Mm,
are, as leaders. I often said, somebody would say to me, "Hey, wow, Josh, you're a children's pastor. You must really love kids." And I said, "Well, I actually do, which is kind of a bonus. But I work with adults who work with adults who work with kids, and
mm,
so." If my small group leaders, if their role was to help kids, my job was to be that small group leader in a sense to my adults who would then pass that
yes.
on to the kids. And so
Hmm.
my
Hmm.
focus was truly on developing them. And
Mm,
and if in fact somebody out there isn't really comfortable praying, if I can have these little micro opportunities at these meetings
mm,
for them to
hmm.
experience that, that's a piece to the discipleship puzzle, and to have their growth as well.
For
Um,
sure.
but that's really what we're there for, right? Is the spiritual piece. And the funny thing also is, I always say that I always try to have my meetings be for the four food groups. your vegetables. Make sure you have a time of prayer. Don't skip your vegetables. Am I right? A little bit of fruit, that's fun, that's fast.
Mhm.
Little bit of meat, we want to have something that sustains us and is
Mhm.
like good training. And then, of course, we want to have those quick carbohydrates, which, of course, could have been sent in an email. However, am I right? You can cover those quickly at the end of a meeting.
Yeah.
But I think
Right.
that praying is often an overlooked thing, and we dismiss
Mm,
the idea that Almighty God is
mm,
available and is listening. Am I right?
mhm, mhm. For sure.
That's
For
so
sure. I
good.
think something else too, and I just thought of this, that's really important when we're training, because I think a lot of times we think of our trainings and we look to what do our volunteers need to know for the future, like looking ahead kind of things.
Yes.
But I think it's also really important in our trainings to look back sometimes and to celebrate what God has done in the ministry and through the
Yes.
ministry and through the volunteers. And so sharing those wins and sharing the celebrations, whether it was, oh, a child who came to Christ or
Yes.
a child who asked a deep question that showed he was really thinking, about the day's lesson, or a child who went on their first service project, like whatever the wins are, but taking time to share those celebrations at our volunteer trainings
Yes.
really, really like juices people up, right? Like
You
gets
know, I
people
think
inspired and excited.
I think that it does. I think that you're right. And to have a culture, Brittany, where people are looking for those things
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm,
you're breeding an opportunity to say, hey, this is who we are. This is why we're here. And to get
mm-hmm.
people to have eyes toward looking for those things and then being able to share those out, even if it's
Yeah.
in a weekly email, but to gather and to say, this is one of the things. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
at Thanksgiving, which we just no, I don't know when this podcast is going to actually, we're doing a live right now, but I'm not sure when the podcast is going to actually be published. But here's the funny thing, Brittany, at your Thanksgiving table, did people out there in your family or whoever you were gathered with,
Mm.
did they say like, hey, let's go around the table and say something we're thankful for?
Yep.
Ours did too.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily, it only seems contrived
Hmm.
outside of Thanksgiving. Now, we as a family, we do this a lot ourselves. That's another whole concept. But the idea that we're actually inviting people to say good things, am I right?
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Super, super important. Okay, last but not least, we've covered kind of now, make sure you're communicating well, make sure that you're
Mm-hmm.
having some food and some fun, and make sure that it is community oriented and people are getting to
Mm.
know one another. And by the way, praying breeds community, no question. So,
Mm.
Brittany, where should people start with this? Maybe some people are listening and they're like, man, that's legit. What they're saying is true. My meetings are boring. So where would you have people start as we kind of close out today?
Yeah, I would say start and look at what you've got so far, look at where you want to be, and then what you need to get there. So start out with what are you doing right now to train your volunteers? What do those meetings slash training sessions, so that's the first thing, we're not going to call them a meeting, right?
Right.
What do those training sessions look like? And where are the ways that you can kind of spice them up a little bit? Where are the ways that you can add some flavoring, add some fun, add some connection times? I don't want people to feel like they have to start this completely brand new thing, right? Like start with what you
Hmm.
already have going and just add some sprinkles.
Yeah. Upgrade
add,
just a
add a
little bit.
little.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Upgrade just a little.
So start with where you're at, but look for those small ways that you can take them deeper and make them more fun and enhance connections and communicate earlier and all of the things that we've talked about.
Because I would say the thing that you don't want to do is get overwhelmed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Be like, I don't do any of these things. And then you seek to do every single one of them. And then you have like this
Right.
Frankenstein looking monster of this, all this randomness. And there are people like, what in the world is going on here? So I would say,
Right.
if
Right.
you don't have food, maybe introduce food. If you
Mm.
do have food, maybe introduce a theme, right? Just pick
Mm-hmm.
something as an upgrade.
Right.
And
Yep.
and I think that some people out there are like, man, I need to have a meeting. You know, you
Mm.
actually do. It's not just about the communication of information. It's about getting
Right.
people to have buy-in. Well, listen, Brittany, you're so fun. You're my friend.
Thanks, Josh.
You're my
You're my
friend. We're
friend
super,
too.
super, super grateful. Hey, tell us just a little bit about your ministry and what
Mhm.
you kind of do to help people in the kingdom.
Sure. So, Deeper Kidmin is the ministry that I run. It's a website, it's all digital resources for children's ministry leaders by children's ministry leaders. So, it's kind of like a Teachers Pay Teachers or a Download Youth Ministry where leaders just like you are sharing the resources that they've created and found successful in their ministries. So, some of the things that I mentioned today, like our superhero volunteer training session, I turned that into a resource on Deeper Kidmin. So you can go and actually download and have everything you could possibly need to host your own superhero themed volunteer training. But it's just a place where leaders can share ideas, share resources. We share encouragement and tips. We have a freebie library with lots of free downloads for our subscribers. But there's lots of great stuff. So check us out on deeperkidmin.com.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, so essentially, if somebody is like, man, where would I start? They could start by going to deeperkidmin.com and
Yeah.
grabbing onto the superhero themed. Like they can download stuff and print stuff, and
Yep.
it's a plug and play. That's kind of my love
Yeah.
language, right?
Yep. You just modify it for your ministry and your context, but you have everything you need down to the agenda, the schedule, emails that you send out, graphics.
I'm telling you.
It's got everything.
Well, everybody should go get that because when we're talking about where people should start, that'd be a fantastic place to start. Well, Brittany, thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I had fun.
Absolutely. Well, gang, this has been another quick episode of Lead Ministry Live and the Lead Volunteers podcast. Super, super grateful that you're here. If you are getting ready to have a meeting that's going to be bad, don't do it. Wait. Make sure your meetings are fun. Make them fun, and we'll catch you guys on the next one.